right. That's right. It was all an inside job. Anyhow, the debater is going to have 7-minute opening statements. Remember that you can become a Crucible member, and you can give the gift of a membership, even though it's past Christmas. Who cares? Do it anyway. Reach into your dirty hearts and give the gift of a membership today. And with that, PF Young, go ahead with your opening statement. You have 7 minutes on the clock.
Cool. I don't think I will need all of it. So, my position is pretty straightforward. I think that Jordan Peterson is a significant net positive for society for at least two main reasons. There's more, but these are the two that I would like to discuss today if possible. Number one, he provides simple, practical, and effective psychological advice, and he does it in a way that is well received by tens of millions of people all over the world, actually. In particular, his advice lands with young men, who I believe Vosh and I would agree are the most dangerous group of people in society when they become resentful, disenfranchised, and socially isolated. Most of the violence, obviously, on the far right is perpetuated by young men, and most of the people who hijacked the Black Lives Matter protests and turned them violent, for example, were also disenfranchised young men. And so if Peterson, who's a clinical psychologist, is providing clinically effective psychological advice on a mass scale to the people who need it most, then that alone, I think, puts him pretty squarely on the net positive side of the equation. I am genuinely curious to hear if there's any advice that Peterson gives to anyone that Vosh disapproves of. The second main reason I think Jordan Peterson is a net positive has to do with his ideas about religion and morality. This is something that hardcore atheists take great issue with Jordan Peterson. This is something that hardcore atheists take great, yes, repeated it twice. Great start. They think he enables fundamentalism by using religious language and being vague about it, and being vague about whether or not he believes in God. And my claim is that Jordan Peterson is actually doing more than anyone to undermine and neutralize religious dogmas, which is a potential exaggeration, maybe not more than anyone. So I'd like to discuss that. And so those are the two main points, and we can talk about whatever Vosh wants to bring up. To be clear, the reason that I say Jordan Peterson is a net positive for society is because he does a lot of things that I think are bad, and I will be as quick to condemn as Vosh. For example, I completely disagree with him when it comes to his hesitance around allowing transgender adults to seek medical transition. He did not say that it should be illegal, but he also said he wasn't sure if it should be legal, which I think is ridiculous. Any adult should be able to undergo whatever medical procedures he or she is willing to pursue, provided they have informed consent. I also think you can make the case that Jordan Peterson is literally the worst Twitter user ever if you factor in wasted potential and just unnecessary boomer old man rage. But overall, I don't think that comes close to outweighing the good he has done on net. He's certainly not a gateway to the alt-right. He's not a religious fundamentalist. And he's not even in remotely the same conceptual universe as Andrew Tate, which I have heard some people make allusions to. Despite the fact that Peterson, like everyone, including myself and Vosh, and especially Andrew, has said dumb things, I think he is genuinely trying to do as much good as he possibly can, and anyone who approaches him with even a relatively open mind will come to the same conclusion. And lastly, I just want to show my cards a little bit. I am coming into this debate very biased. Because I have gotten a lot of mental health help personally myself from watching Peterson's lectures. He is in part what drove me to go to therapy a couple years ago, which is a good decision. And there is, in my opinion, there's a part of me that that gets resentful about having to defend that as a straight white male I needed mental health help, and I got it from a YouTube video lecture and then went to therapy. And while I think there is a justifiable indignance I feel when people say, for example, that Jordan Peterson is a Nazi or a terrible person, the fact that I'm biased towards him does not absolve me of the responsibility to be open to legitimate critiques. And if anyone can levy a legitimate critique against Jordan Peterson, I bet it's Vosh. So thank you to both you guys, and I look forward to this.
All right, thank you for that opening statement. Vosh, go ahead. The clock is restarted. You have 7 minutes on the clock. You can use all of it, as little bit as you want, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you fronted and preemptively address the "he's a bad Twitter user" argument. That was my golden bullet there. Aside from that one, though, there were a couple of things. So, we're talking net positives here, and the problem ultimately with discussing the potential value of a psych advice is that he is primarily known for and popularized by conservative political arguments more so than self-help. He's known as a self-help guy, but he became famous because of his fallacious opposition to Bill C-16 in Canada. He's now a part of the Daily Wire network, you know. What he's known for, what he talks about, it is at this point primarily conservative propaganda, which, you know, obviously I disagree with. When it comes to the self-help stuff, I have read some of 12 Rules for Life, not just the snippets online, but a little bit of it, because I was curious to see what it contained. And I think that for the most part, a lot of his psychological prescriptions are fairly inoffensive. I don't think they're revolutionary or groundbreaking. I'm glad that some of the messaging in there is somewhat popular with people who are interested in hearing it. I guess the issue here is this is kind of like the, the goat problem, right? Like you build 1,000 bridges and you one goat. And I feel like we're talking about a disproportionate sliver of what the man does and is responsible for. If I were to evaluate him purely on his psychological credentials, what value there is to that, I would say that whatever good there is to the positive psychiatric advice, I think, is offset by the fact that he will invariably, by proxy, wisen these young men up to conservative politics, which I think are harmful not only to the world but also to their mental health. It seems like it kind of self-compensates in that respect. I also take great issue with his emphasis on individualism as a way of distracting from systemic issues. He's famously said you shouldn't critique the world unless your own house is in order, and I am okay with messaging on the subjects of independence, self-reliance, discipline. That's fine. I think those are good, wonderful things. But the message, like, you shouldn't attempt to engage in systemic critique unless your house is in order. Well, everyone's house isn't in order. Nobody could meet that standard. It seems like a way of dissuading people from engaging in the kind of systemic change that could actually address a lot of the issues people need people like Peterson for, kind of like they make jokes about how Peterson is a surrogate dad for a lot of people who didn't have a good relationship with their father. A lot of people say that insultingly, but I don't think there's anything morally wrong or shameful about having grown up without a good father figure, right? But ultimately, I hope we could agree that the ideal would be a world in which there isn't a bunch of people who feel that way, Addressing the underlying systemic cause there seems like a more worthwhile goal. And if he's impeding that process, then I don't know. And finally, I'll just say, on religion and morality, I don't really take issue with his use of religious terminology when it comes to his moral denunciations. I think that we tend to see stuff like that in flowery poetry anyway, so it seems like it's kind of unavoidable, especially with somebody as verbose and eccentric as him. And I mean that sincerely. But his system of morality is his actual system of deciding what is or isn't moral seems really incoherent in a way that normally leans towards the validation of conservative ideals, and that's because the whole point of religious justification of moral systems is that now you can assign a kind of supernatural or metaphysical importance to your beliefs. And if you're doing that in a really bad direction, I think you're potentially doing a lot of damage. I would rather have to deal with bad secular arguments against, say, the existence of, gay people than religious ones, because you run up against a logical wall with the religious ones. Eventually, you can't convince people past a point because it's metaphysically justified. Anyway, those are my points, and I need no more time.
All right, appreciate that very much. Before I open the floor up, just let me remind the audience on wherever you're watching that we will be taking call-ins tonight, and also send in a super chat if you have a question for the debaters. As the debate is going, we will be getting to all those and getting all those fielded. Last thing I did want to quickly address before I open the floor up was Vosh brought up the goat analogy, which is essentially to say, and I just want to make sure I got this right, Vosh, that you can spend your entire life being a great builder, for instance, and build the greatest of all cathedrals, but if you one goat, you're not known as the cathedral builder, but as the goat builder. Is that correct?
Yes, or as the self-help advice guy.
Right. I have my own version of saying that one, but I think it's a funny one, I must admit. Anyway, gentlemen, the floor is open. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I think lobster would be more appropriate for Jordan Peterson to go. But I guess, okay, it sounded like you don't. So just to be clear, you don't have any issue with any moral prescription that Jordan Peterson offers from a self-help or psychological perspective. Is that correct?
Well, I don't have them all listed in front of me. I'm sure if you were to, I could find some
Anyone.
specific ones I disagree with. I doubt I would agree with everything he says there, but the offensive stuff, the stuff that I really take issue with, is the broader political stuff. He has said some
Sure.
stuff on the self-help train that I do explicitly disagree with, like the aforementioned make sure your house is in order before critiquing the world kind of thing. But generally when I critique him, it's not for the self-help stuff.
Yeah, well, the point about, I think his order, his rule is, what is it, keep your house in perfect order before you criticize the world? Which I think is the worst rule he's written, because no one's house can ever be in perfect order, so the implication is that you can't criticize the world. If I ever had the opportunity to ask him one question, I would say, why did you purposely put the word perfect? I think you should set your house in order. I think you should generally get your own life together before you go about starting to criticize and offer solutions for massive problems when you can't even solve the problems that are right in front of you in your own life. So I think that's the underlying message. I guess, what is, you said his self-help leads to conservative values, which, okay, depending on how you define conservative, maybe. And I know that you are not a conservative. I don't think anyone would be surprised at that. But conservative does not mean bad. I think you'd have to explain what behavior his advice leads to, and why that behavior is bad.
Well, I think a lot of it is just pure adjacency. Even if all of his self-help advice is perfect, I mean, like if I disagree with none of it, which isn't really possible for anyone, but let's say he met that standard, if he was also a conservative commentator, then simply by being popular as a self-help guy, he would then legitimize the conservative politics through adjacency. Especially because self-help is such an intimate and personal topic. It's not just like he's really good at car repair, but is also a conservative. You can't really separate self-help from one's political views, because fundamentally in both cases you're talking about like prescriptive values, not some bland, descriptive, technical thing. So even if all of his self-help positions were perfect, I still think that he would be pulling people over to conservatism just by being.
Okay, and like I said, conservative and liberal both have their benefits and flaws, so, or conservative and progressive, or however you want it, left and right, to be as broad as possible. I don't see that inherently as a problem. And maybe more interestingly, because you brought up I brought up religion and you responded to that. Jordan Peterson, for example, the reason I said that Jordan Peterson is doing more to undermine religious dogmatism than anyone, and I would say religious dogmatism is central to religious or to political conservatism. He's an evolutionary biologist who makes the case for the evolutionary, evolving of religion as adaptive features of evolution. Religions are belief systems that have wisdom in them. And he's taking an evolutionary perspective on that, and a religious fundamentalist, unless you define religious fundamentalist in a very strange way, would necessarily take odds with that. So I don't see how his entire body of work, being at odds with religious fundamentalism, leads to anything approaching conservative values or dogmatism.
Well, it seems like you agree with the idea that people would be moved to conservatism through his self-help stuff just because he is a conservative, because there is that adjacency. But when it comes to religious fundamentalism specifically, the fundamentalist elements of his ideology are the ones that I take most issue with. I wouldn't really care if he was a flat earther or a creationist or whatever. He assigns religious inherent moral weight to his denunciations. The political ones, which are, of course, conservative and therefore highly disagreeable. See, it's impossible to talk about his effect on the world without really evaluating the kind of stuff he has to say politically. And a lot of it is really, really bad. If it wasn't so bad, I wouldn't have so much an issue with himself.
But like what? Like, give me an example.
Well, I mean,
Well, what is an example of him using invoking religious metaphysics to justify a political position.
Well, all of his moral denunciations are inherently metaphysically religious. When he says something is evil, or which he says all the time, he's not saying evil in the sense of like, I disagree with this. He's invoking God there. He believes that morality comes from religion. For that reason, when he's denouncing something, it must necessarily come from some kind of like innate worldview. I mean, he does the whole chaos versus order thing, but what he's doing there fundamentally is like analogizing the light of God versus like the pernicious influence of the devil. It's all just different ways of framing the same binary moral system that we've seen religious types invoke as a way of justifying their politics.
Okay, you said earlier you don't have an issue with him using religious language. It's just kind of like poetic or whatnot. And you just described him using religious language and said you had an issue with it.
Not fundamentally, but my issue there isn't
Right.
the language that he uses. It's the metaphysical weight of what he's denouncing. When he says evil, like evil is not a religious term. Plenty of people use the term evil. But when he's talking about evil, good, bad, and morality in general, he's doing so from a perspective of like religiously informed moral dogmatism, which obviously it kind of sets the work that he's doing, both in self-help and in politics, in a very particular light.
Okay. You assert that, but I don't think it's true. Because the number one of the main pieces of criticism of him is that he's squirrely about whether or not he's actually religious, right? When someone says, do you believe in God? He doesn't say yes. He says, I act as if God exists. He says fundamentalists are naive. He says that people who take the Bible literally are swallowing a bunch of lies. So to
He's
me,
swirly
that's
about
very...
a lot of stuff, though.
Well, aren't we all? Bosh.
Well, he's like famously squirrely about a lot of stuff. He gives non-answers all the time when he's asked direct questions.
If he was that squirrely, he wouldn't have millions of people listening to his lectures for 3 hours.
I don't think that's true. Also, I've listened to his lectures, and they're also quite squirrely. When he's asked direct questions, he worms around them all the time. He was famous for this. Like, you give an interview on Ask, what specifically do you believe? And he talks around it. Often, I think,
Right.
in babble speak. But sometimes he just clearly doesn't want to directly answer it. At any case, though, my issue here is not whether or not he specifically believes in some fundamentalist version of God. Do you believe, when he says something is evil, good, or bad, do you think he's appealing to some kind of like fundamental natural moral force, something supernatural, divine, something otherworldly? Or do you think he's doing this kind of utilitarian subjectivism? He's only saying it's evil from his perspective.
I'm not sure I fully understand the implications of the things that you set up there. I mean, people, like you said, people use the term evil. You said evil is not a religious term, and I think actually evil is a very religious term. All of the non-religious people, like the determinists, would say that someone who's engaging in evil it's just a defect of the brain or something. Psychopathy is not evil if you understand it as psychopathy. So again, I don't. You say he's using religious language, and he's invoking the metaphysical weight behind it. But again, I don't.
Well, so when he
need
says,
to provide an example of something he said invoking specifically the metaphysical.
well, he talks about the metaphysical all the time, but he talks about order, chaos, and the dragon and stuff. He's using these concepts to kind of refer to the broad moral value of certain types of worlds. I mean, literally, like good and evil, the framing between these things. When he talks about that, what do you think he's saying? Like when he says something is evil, what do you think he means?
I don't know. What's an example of something he said is evil?
I mean, I could go to his Twitter account. He uses the word pretty often, right?
Well, I believe he's also. I won't say it, but he's quoted. He said some very stupid shit on Twitter.
Sure, well, let's say
give an
transgender
example.
children, children taking hormone blockers. So he says that's evil. What does he mean when he says that?
I think what he means about when he's talking about trans children, he's specifically referring to gender reassignment surgery and double mastectomies being performed on like 13-year-olds by physicians who have a financial incentive. And when he says that's evil, I think that's, to me, that's self-evident why that's evil.
Well,
Just
we're loading
it's self-evident why someone abusing a child for profit is evil.
We're loading a lot here. So a surgeon is a job. So if they're doing the job, they're doing it with a profit motive. But he has not specifically said, like you said himself, he is denouncing the right for adults to pursue gender-affirming surgery,
No,
which means
he
that
said he wasn't sure whether or not it should be illegal.
okay, well, even you took time to call out that behavior of his, so we agree
Right.
then that he
And
has
specify what he said.
a bugbear with what he with the issue of access to trans. But let's say specifically like a 16-year-old.
13-year-olds getting their breasts cut off.
Okay, so let's say like a 16-year-old trans chick is getting hormone blockers, which is the thing that can happen. You can do that. It's possible. In such a case, when he says this is evil, and he has said stuff like that is evil, not just 13-year-old double mastectomy, whatever, but he's applied the term there as well.
I don't think that's true. Not about 16-year-olds, because he's a fan of Ken Zucker's work, and Ken Zucker does prescribe puberty blockers for 16-year-olds. So what he says is evil is 13-year-olds getting their breasts removed. So no, I don't agree it's the 16-year-olds.
Didn't he go after Elliot Page, who was in his 20s, saying that it was maybe morally wrong for a public figure to be trans, to, like, corrupt the values of people?
No, he said he would have left Elliot Page alone and she not made it a big deal and flaunted it. And his argument
He's
was,
a celebrity. Why would he
how
not?
many
He made one tweet.
how many people did Elliot Page convince to pursue gender surgery than they otherwise might not have because of her? Which, you know, it's like, again, I think that was a rage tweet, but let's stick with the argument of 13-year-olds. We know for a fact, it's not disputed, I can pull up the studies right now from the Journal of the American Medical Association, that 13-year-olds are having their breasts cut off, double mastectomies, and then followed up with 6 months to 2 years later, and it's considered a success. Jordan Peterson says that's evil. To me, that's self-evident.
I don't think I've actually ever heard a story of a 13-year-old getting a double mastectomy. I'm sure you could find some cases, but we would be talking maybe like single digits for that age. That's really far down. Why at that age? Why would you even get a double mastectomy when you're still going to experience breast growth? That's kind of weird.
There's a number of things going on. But hold on, to say it's a small, first off, it may be a small number. But to say it's a small number doesn't eliminate the moral weight or severity of it.
Then why are we talking about like such an incredibly small minority? Like why can't we just say like so?
Well, that's the response that conservatives say when why are we talking about police shooting unarmed black men when only about 20 unarmed black men are killed per year?
Because we're talking about a broader systemic issue.
Exactly. That's why we're talking about the 13-year-old double mastectomy.
Okay, but what we're really trying to talk about is what Jordan Peterson means when he says evil. So you say it's self-evidently evil that happens. What do you mean when you say evil?
I mean the same thing when I say someone abusing a child is evil. I don't feel like I need to explain myself in that regard.
Well, I'm asking you to explain yourself. What do you mean by evil? What does that term mean to you?
Yes, we can see that, Andrew. I don't know. When I say the Nazis gassing Jews in the Holocaust was evil, are you being serious right now in that do you want me to explain that as if it's not obvious?
I want you to tell me what you mean when you say evil. What does the word evil mean? What system are you referring to when you say something is evil? What's the...
It's very, very bad. It should be avoided at all costs.
Okay, but
That's what I mean by evil.
Right, but why? Like, what... So you say something is evil, so it's bad. Okay, but like
right,
why? By what system?
By what system?
Like, how do you know if something is evil?
How do I know that when Hitler rounded up the Jews and put them in gas chambers that was evil? I don't know. I get a funny feeling, I guess, when I hear that, and I think this sounds pretty evil to me. Do you understand this is kind of a weird question?
No, it's actually essential. Without grounding where your morality comes from, it's almost impossible to talk about it.
Okay. Well, we can have the conversation about moral realism, moral anti-realism, and maybe come back to this.
But this is kind of critical, right? When it comes to
do you
Jordan
believe
Peterson,
in evil? What do you mean when do you agree that, for example, let's just take an obvious example we both agree on, I would assume. You do believe that what the Nazis did was evil, correct?
Of course.
Okay. And what is your standard for
well,
defining evil?
I'm a moral anti-realist, so I arbitrarily chose a set of axioms that I want to maximize, which I do through a normative ethical framework that I call utilitarianism, and not just I, a bunch of people do. And then through utilitarianism, I tried to determine whether or not I think something is good or bad based on the effects that it has. And evil is basically just a strong word for bad in this case. I don't think that evil has a distinct meaning. I just think it means bad.
That's how I use it.
very.
Sure. That's how I'm using it. Very, very bad.
Right, but so are you a moral anti-realist as well?
I mean, I don't know. Certainly Peterson's been accused of being a moral anti. Anyone who
that's definitely not true. Jordan Peterson has a
that's absolutely true. He's accused of being postmodern by all the religious people.
Does that mean he is? It's not like religious types are that philosophically educated.
Well, I think some of them. I agree that some of them aren't, but I think some of them are pretty well educated.
Look,
I'm kind of confused. This is the conversation we're having. Say your problem with Jordan Peterson. So, he invokes metaphysical religious presuppositions or something like that, which I say he doesn't do, and you haven't given an example of how that's the case. He uses evil in, as far as I know, the way that you're using it, very, very bad, and it's what I don't understand is.
But why is it very, very bad?
Why
because his assessment for whether or not something is good or bad has nothing to do with mine.
Do you understand that? When we come into a conversation, we have to have some level of agreement on the underlying rules that we're operating by, the presuppositions. And for example, the Nazis are bad, and we'll use that as the example. I feel like I don't need to explain myself. I'll use it in the same way. Very, very bad. Whatever you said, utilitarian. I believe in maximizing good. What's Jordan Peterson's main motto? Minimize unnecessary suffering. Jordan Peterson's a strict utilitarian in that regard, though.
If he's a strict utilitarian, then it seems kind of odd that the stuff he says is good or bad all the time has very little to do with what's actually harmful. I mean, you want to denounce his Twitter behavior broadly, and I mean, he does come across as kind of a crank sometimes on it. But like the most prominent times that he's gotten in trouble on Twitter recently, where he randomly called a fat woman like ugly and said that authoritarian beauty standards wouldn't convince him otherwise.
Yes, I believe he said not beautiful, which was a mistake, and I literally made a video saying actually.
Right, and he continued with it with the videos he made. Then he made a video with his daughter.
He's imperfect.
And there was the Elliot Page thing, where he seems to adopt the position that it's morally wrong for a celebrity to be trans because other people might be trans because of it?
No, he's saying it's wrong to celebrate it, flaunt it, propagate it out to 13-year-old children who.
So, don't overload it. Don't overload it. Elliot Page just took the picture. So Elliot Page is trans and just like took a selfie.
Okay, so his opinion, and I don't think he should have tweeted that about Elliot Page. But I'm explaining his thought process for going back to what's evil or not. His point is there appears to be a social epidemic of a lot of children in particular converting or undergoing gender therapy when it's not correct for them. The Tavistock Clinic, which is the biggest gender assignment clinic in the UK, was shut down. It's being sued by 1,000 families. Scandinavia, I have to double check in Scandinavia banning puberty blockers, but they certainly recommended a wait-and-see approach, which is the opposite of the affirmative care model. There's over the next
and they're wrong, yes.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Over the next year or two, there's going to be numerous stories, and I've talked to people already, been in this position, of people who thought they were transgender, underwent medical transition, and then regretted it. The regret rate is 1%. That's what the study said. If that was the case, you wouldn't have thousands.
Yeah, you can.
So that there's current. The point is, to be fair, I'm asserting this, and you're asserting the opposite. We'd have to actually look at the studies.
We can look at the studies directly. Something like 98% of people don't regret their gender-related surgery and hormone treatments, which is a level of acceptance several times higher than that of hip surgery.
That's
the overwhelming majority of people who detransition as well detransition due to running out of money or lack of social support. I think it's something like 70% in total. So we have like 98% are satisfied with their medical so and so. And then of the 2% remaining, a majority of those only detransitioned because of a lack of the resources or social care they needed to keep at it, leaving a very small minority of people lower than that of the regret rates of almost anything else. There's a reason why medical standards trend towards the affirmative care model. It's because it's the one with the most supportive data. The UK closed down those clinics, and the lawsuits are happening not because of medical research, but because of politics. That happened after a prolonged multi-year campaign of conservatives lying about the effectiveness of gender therapy and gender treatments. And what follows, you said Scandinavian, it's one of the Scandinavian countries, I don't remember which one. They did move to more of a wait-and-see model for puberty blockers, and the reason for that was in part the citation of the UK clinic shutting down. So all this suggests to me that this is politics. Sweet. It's politics at play, not medicine. So it seems to me like we're at kind of like an ethical impasse.
Can I respond to that?
Well, I just want to say, what Jordan Peterson is talking about, we were talking about the Nazis earlier, which I think is very apropos.
Hold on, before we move on, I want to address...
Hang on, Paul. Paul.
I just want to finish, and then I'll be done. Really quick. Jordan Peterson was saying that Elliot Page was a degenerate. The Nazi theory of degeneracy is one in which pervasive social harm and corruption, usually through liberal progressivism, is spread from person to person, disease, and has to be cut off at the root and burned out or eradicated entirely. That is what Jordan Peterson was saying, that Elliot was spreading degeneracy by promoting those elements of himself.
Okay. There's a couple things I want to say. First off, he never said degenerate. That never showed up in his vocabulary.
Never said it, no.
Okay, so that was wrong. And everything else you said regarding the studies, I'm aware that that's the perspective that people have. That's 100% wrong. Those studies are as valid as the Lisa Littman study that suggests rapid onset gender dysphoria is a social contagion. So you can assert everything you said about the regret rate is 1%, the social transition rate, or the reason that people cite when they detransition is because of social regret. That is all 100% wrong. And
can you prove that?
This is an open challenge to you or anyone watching. I am more than happy to pull up the study. We can't do it in this debate because we didn't prepare for this ahead of time. We'll pull up the studies on screen, go through every single section of the study, and I am utterly confident, I could be wrong, but I am utterly confident that not a single person can defend any of the studies that are suggesting that imply any of the statistics that you just put forward. So we have to have a separate discussion for that, because it's just a he said, unless we pull up the studies. And
we can bring them up right now. A lot of these studies have thousands or even tens of thousands of respondents, whereas the study that you referred to, the one that talks about rapid onset dysphoria or whatever else, that was just polling a bunch of transphobic moms.
That's what. Okay, here's what I'll wrap this, because, and Andrew, let's have, whether it's you or whoever, let's have this discussion where we send the studies in advance and pull up ahead of time.
Then wait, just tell me why they're illegitimate then. If we don't want to go by it
for the same reasons the Lisa, I went through the meta-analysis that I think Rose Risk put together some time ago, 50 Cornell studies, every single one of them was as flawed as the Lisa Littman study. Okay, for the same reasons.
The Lisa Littman study was flawed because all they did was ask the parents who they found from transphobic online forums and developed a new social theory based on what they heard, complete hearsay from those people. Whereas the studies I'm referring to are meta-analyses of
individual studies that did the same thing.
Wait, no. We're talking about clinics reporting satisfaction rates from their clients. We're not asking the
flawed studies.
Wait,
you gave an example why Lisa Littman's study is flawed, because
I just explained it to you. So you can't ask the moms of a social group that you want to target, especially if you're recruiting them from bigoted online sites. But
sure.
What I'm talking about...
Equally, hold on, let me respond to that exact point. Equally, if you're conducting a study that says the surgery was successful, you cannot have a sample selection bias of only the pro-trans website. And that's exactly what every single study...
Wait. They're not...
Yes.
Wait. These weren't pulled from pro-trans websites.
They were
from, no. They weren't. They were from the patients at clinics. They were reports of satisfaction from the actual medical clinics were these
of
people
those that
affected?
stayed in the clinic. Many of them left and were never reported on. Hold on.
Wait, so wait, no, please, wait, no, wait, hold on, wait, no, I can't let you get away with this, okay?
You can finish this point.
The fact that you're comparing, so the Lee Slipman study is its own thing. We're talking about the same standard of analysis and medical accreditation that we would use for any kind of surgery or medical care satisfaction process. You have a certain number of people at a clinic, and they all get a certain treatment, and they report their satisfaction outcomes, and then you add those numbers together and you get results. We use that system for every kind of medical treatment. And now somehow, for this specific issue, it's an illegitimate way of ascertaining the regret rate. Well, based on what evidence? What's the issue?
So, like I said,
hang on. We need to tie this in somehow to the topic at hand, which is Jordan Peterson, and that's not where we're at. We've kind of gotten off into the weeds.
We need to move on from this subject.
So I'm not moving into save anybody, not save anybody, but we have gone way off into the weeds here. So Vosh, did you have a way to tie that into Jordan Peterson, or was that like kind of a standalone point, or what did you have in mind with that?
Well, if we're talking about morality, what we're talking about ultimately is like my thesis here is that Jordan Peterson's interpersonal advice is massively outweighed by the harm of his political positions. And if he's spreading essentially Nazi doctrine when it comes to transgender people and their medical care, and that people are believing that doctrine because they trust him on the 12 rules of life or whatever, I think that's a pretty strong case for overall harm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid point, Paul. So
Sure. Is it a valid point? The idea that he's spreading... So, just to put a pin in that. Again, the next time we cross paths, Vosh, we can exchange studies ahead of time. And instead of the audience going, I don't know if I should believe Paul or I don't know if I should believe Vosh, we'll pull up the studies on screen and walk through them. Otherwise, it's the he said, she said. But to your point about, what is it? He's spreading Nazi, propaganda or something? So, I believe you have said that Jordan Peterson is a Nazi, literally. Is that correct?
I think that he enables Nazi ideology. I don't think he's interpersonally a Nazi. I think he's a fascist, for sure, though.
I see. You think he's a fascist?
Yeah. He's pretty consistent in this regard, especially with his
go
Daily
ahead.
Wire
Explain to
videos.
us. What's an example of something that he's put forward that is a fascist idea?
Well, I would say the theory of social degeneracy is a pretty straightforward one to begin with. But if we were to go beyond that point, I would say that his concept of cultural Marxism, another and the obsession with pay at the best, these are very common fascist frameworks for modern political obviously, his general support of the conservative movement and working for Daily Wire, a fascist organization, doesn't help so that seems pretty direct, as it were. But no, I don't think that he is like a armband and Sieg Heil Nazi or
That's good.
so
That's
on.
good. That would be a bad look for me if he was. I won't lie.
I don't think he's there
That
yet.
would make this debate much harder on my end.
He'll get there
Well,
eventually.
I'm glad we're there. Yeah, potentially. Okay, well, look, I'm aware that this is something you say, so I'll say this. I think I'm the fool for even entertaining this idea that Jordan Peterson is a fascist, but because it's like, okay, it's like Hitler was a fascist, so Jordan Peterson is using the same word to describe Hitler as Jordan Peterson. On the one hand, it's a bit, I think. But I'll give you space to explain what is your criteria for labeling someone a fascist.
Well, I mean,
whether or
JP
not
and Hitler were both nationalists, no?
Well, everyone who loves their country is a nationalist.
Well, then I guess sometimes these terms have wide applicability outside of the most extreme examples.
Yeah, but right, and that's I believe this is called equivocation, if I remember my nerd debate bro logic shit, where you use a word that you know doesn't mean what everyone else uses.
well,
but
then
you get
Paul,
to define
then
it.
Paul, you make the point.
No, I think he's fine to say this. I mean it in the sense that you imagine I
Fuck you,
mean.
Andrew.
I mean he is a fascist. I'm not dancing around it or beating around the bush with it
Okay.
may be, he's
So-
some light version.
Okay.
I think
So
that is his
what-
ideology.
Okay, so can you give me we talked about social degeneracy that leads into the trans issues, which we have to discuss at a separate time using studies. There's certainly other reasons you would call him a fascist. Can you give me one example of an idea he has put forward? This is something you can do that
Well, the main one is cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is just a retooled version of cultural Bolshevism. It's the same conspiracy. The idea that the West, in the old case Germany, of course, but now the West, is being destroyed via liberal academics who hate America and often hate white people, and are using the Frankfurt School stuff, that kind of business. Oh, he did recently agree with Putin. Putin said that the invasion of Ukraine was justifiable because it was a way of preventing the spread of liberal degeneracy into Russia. And I believe JP said, and I quote, like, and who could blame him? Because he was talking broadly about, like, crazy lefties on Twitter or whatever, and it's like, well, who could blame him doing an invasion to prevent right, so stuff like that.
Okay, I think that's complete bullshit that he said, who can blame Putin for invading Ukraine? He might have used that phrase with some other, like, you know, Putin, like many people, are worried about the direction of the West. And for example, all of the weird, the decline of Western civilization, which is like, I don't see any difference between saying Western civilization or in late stage capitalism. So to me, it's like, you say that one's a conspiracy, but one's a progressive point. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, the question will be, why is Western civilization declining? Because late-stage capitalist theory is just an analysis of the economic conditions we're living under.
Well, let's talk about the cultural Marxism thing, because that's fun and silly, in my opinion. So, okay, you said cultural Marxism. Jordan Peterson has used the term cultural Marxism. He really used the term postmodern, which we can talk about postmodernism, because you yourself are a postmodernist, correct?
Probably. It's complicated, but yeah, I'm highly sympathetic to their influences.
That sounds like something postmodernists would say, but that's fair. So the implication is Jordan Peterson. First off, I disagree that he's using culture. When Jordan Peterson talks about cultural Marxism, he's not referencing a Nazi conspiracy. He's referring to the impact of Marxism on culture, which is exactly what it sounds like.
Which is what the Nazis were talking about.
Well, the Nazis were not big fans of, well, Israel didn't exist yet, but the Nazis were not a big fan of Jewish people. And it's like, okay, if Ilhan Omar pushes for BDS, boycott, that sanction Israel, does that make her a Nazi because she agreed with Nazis?
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with protesting Israel, but if she was an anti-Semite, I would say that's definitely a parallel between her and the Nazis.
Yeah, but the evidence that you're citing for Jordan Peterson being an anti-Semite is that he's repeating the talking points of Nazis, and I could just as easily say
I'm only saying
Israel is repeating the talking points of
I'm
Nazis,
only saying it's the same conspiracy theory. The idea that Frankfurt School academic intellectual communists infiltrated American culture and destroying it from within. That's what I want to know. Why do people believe the West is in decline? I'm not entirely sure if I understand that. Our GDP is skyrocketing compared to that of China's, India's, and broadly the rest of the world. We have the strongest military. I don't know what people mean when they say the West is in decline.
For a Marxist, that's a remarkably capitalist defense of the growth of the West, saying that the GDP has gone up. I believe life expectancy is going down, mental health issues are increasing rapidly, people are believing themselves to be TOS friendly at increasing. There's more and more polarization. The idea that what are people referring to when the civilization has declined? To me, that's an indication of how you might not be paying attention as close as you could.
Well, I mean, I'm being kind of facetious. I know that when people talk about the West, they're usually talking about cultural Marxism, immigration, Muslims, and leftism. I see a lot of West is in decline stuff whenever, you see like drag queens, for example, because the West is in decline because they're wearing frilly clothing, for example. I hear the West is in decline in response to a lot of stuff. If the West was truly in decline, I'm not entirely sure why conservatives are so opposed to the concept of SSRIs or therapy broadly. It seems like
Certainly Jordan Peterson is the opposite of that. He specifically says that if you've got mental health issues, you should give SSRIs a try.
sure.
He's a clinical therapist himself.
In that respect, he might be better than the average conservative milieu, but the fear-mongering about the West being in decline.
A slightly kind Nazi, but not an all-the-way bad one.
Oh, he is. I stand by the fascist accusation. Again, he talks about cultural Marxism on and on and on and on and on.
Okay, so are people who support Jordan Peterson, does that make them fascist by
No. I mean, I think it means they like the fascists, but unfortunately in the current political climate, it seems pretty difficult to avoid that if you're even mildly tolerant of, like, center-leaning media. Because there's a lot of people there who are kind of, like, edging on the side of things.
Okay. Okay. The reason I'm pondering for a moment is, do you understand that what you're saying, what you've been saying the past few minutes is very different from what you say in the other videos?
Well, I call him a fascist in those videos, too.
Well, you say a variety of things about, like, conservatives in general, like that they're what is it? They're no different from the KKK. Conservatives today are no different from the KKK in the world. I think the quote was frothing at the mouth. Black people from integrated schools. You said that, and now it seems like you are not standing by those beliefs and taking it back and hiding the power level a bit.
No, I still stand with whatever it is I said back there. I don't think there's much of an ideological difference between a modern American conservative and a member of the Ku Klux Klan. It's just a continuation of existing ideals. You know, it's not exactly a conspiracy that there was, like, this huge wave of Ku Klux Klan support that was kind of backed by conservative politicians at the time. Those politicians lasted a long time, too. And a lot of their ideological forebears, right up until the Civil Rights Movement, you know, they were pretty open and friendly with a lot of really obviously anti-black stuff. And then Civil Rights Movement happens, the act gets passed, and can't say the N-word anymore. But a lot of the same people stayed in office, and a lot of their children and friends ran and won in their offices later, and it makes you wonder just how much stuff they kept bottled up. At any rate, the ideology is still remarkably similar. Xenophobia and nativism are the big driving forces of modern conservatism, and I think Jordan Peterson plays into that quite a lot as well, largely with the cultural Marxism bit.
Okay, the reason I'm not being as warm and welcoming as I could otherwise be is what you said. The implication of what you said is that, for example, my conservative friends and family members are no different than the Ku Klux Klan. Do you understand why that limits the degree to which I can take a lot of the other things you say seriously, and why many people in general don't take as much as you say seriously as they might otherwise?
Well, I'm not trying to hide in audacity. I think it's a fairly straightforward assessment of where modern American conservatism is. I mean, do you think that families of the Ku Klux Klan back 120 years ago didn't talk with each other as normal people? Everybody thinks they're normal, right? But obviously with retrospect...
But it's just us with conservative friends and family members who are literally as bad as the Ku Klux Klan today. That's what you're saying. The Ku Klux Klan who burned down the homes of black people with black children in them and hung them. You're saying my friends and family members, people watching this who have friends and family members who are conservative, they're just as bad. That's what you're saying.
Nowadays, you would instead cheer on the racist policing system that's used to disproportionately inflict violence against black people. So you've sort of delegated the violence to a system, a very expensive one at that. Sheesh, at least the taxes didn't pay for the KKK. But fundamentally, I think that the parallels remain there. They're not the same in terms of, like, the exact extent of the harm they commit interpersonally, obviously. I'm talking about ideological synchronicity. But yeah, no, I mean, the modern American conservative, like, this is a template of fascism. If I believe, for example, that Ron DeSantis and Trump are both fascists, which I do, and the GOP is a fascist org, why would I not believe then that conservatives in America today are themselves, I mean, at least fascist sympathizers, right? You know, not individually every single one of them is like an ideological fascist, but they're, at the very least, they're part of the movement. It's not meant as an insult. Obviously, I disagree with that, but I think it's
not meant as an insult.
It.
Hey, you and your friends and family who might have voted for Trump, they're as bad as the KKK. You don't understand why people would take that as an insult?
Ideologically descendant of the KKK. You can take it as an insult, but I think we have to
Oh, I see.
we have
It's
to
much
reach that
better.
middle ground before we can have any reasonable
You're not
discussion
a
on
Ku Klux
fascism.
Klan member who hates black people. You're just an ideological descendant of a Ku Klux Klan member who hates black people. I think that's. I think that is a condescending defense of an indefensible position.
Well, it's not meant. I'm not meant to be Weasley when I say that. I just genuinely think that is the case, right? I mean, like we would have to acknowledge, for example, that the conservative parties in modern day Germany would have had ideological roots in Nazis, right? The conservative party, the current leader of Italy, for example, literally like a direct lineage of the supporters of Mussolini. So I think it would be fair then to say the people who voted for her would be ideologically in line
Yes,
with that, right?
I understand the formula of the argument you're making. You
Right.
said you genuinely believe in what you're saying. So you're saying, do you have any friends? Do you hang out with anyone who is a fascist or a conservative, although that's the same word? Do you have any friends who are? Yeah, I'll leave it open because.
There are a couple of online people I talk to, friendly, who are
Okay,
I would
so-
consider such. Yes.
Okay, so if you believe that conservatives are literally Ku Klux Klan members, literally ideological descendants, we'll keep it tight. Why are you hanging out with them?
Well, I don't think
What
there's
does
any.
that say about you and your character?
I mean, some people might disagree. There are people on the left who get mad at me, by the way. They got mad at me for being friends with Shu, still do. They're mad at me for all sorts of things. But their opinions aren't really what matters here, right? I don't think it morally compromises me to have a friendly conversation with a person of any ideological disposition. I've never been the kind of person who thought that every interaction you have with somebody you disagree with has to be like a shouting match or anything. But I feel like this is genuinely not directed as an insult, okay? So whatever
I
you
don't
may
believe
think.
that.
Okay, here, out of curiosity, what do you think of communism? Of the ideology, what do you think? Of its lineage, of its effect?
There are some things I like better than communism.
Some things.
Yeah, like ice cream.
Okay, gotcha. But you would probably put it below the 50-50 par, right?
Probably. That's a fair statement.
So, whatever associations you may have with communism, you could fairly draw that line to me from my ideology and its precedent, you know? Whatever use you'd think you would get out of this discussion for it, you know, if we were talking about something like that specifically. But my goal here is not, oh, haha, now that I have denounced you as the fascist, we can move on, we can leave, you are bad now. My goal is, you know, these are the ideological roots of where you're coming from. This is like the ground.
So what is
the
your
base.
goal? Is your goal? I'm just a genuine question. And let me just say, I have a lot of thoughts based on the last 15, 20 minutes of our conversation. I have said specifically that I do not think that you are a uniquely bad person, or you're not capable of any unique level of harm that anyone else is, right? You've had cameras on, you have a huge audience, so naturally the impact of everything you say is going to be worse, but there's nothing unique per se about you. In fact, that's central to Jordan Peterson's whole body of work, is that each of us have the capacity to be a Nazi camp guard, and had we been in Weimar Germany, it's likely that most of us would, and so you have to understand that capacity for harm. And so I'm actually, the reason I sympathize with what you just said about, you know, just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean you need to have a screaming match with them or whatnot. You can still be friends with them. And I'm to the degree that I'm able, I'm trying to engage with you honestly for the same reason. But I guess it confuses me, because if you are genuinely interested in, let's say, combating fascism, then it seems like you would recognize that calling people's friends and family KKK members, or equivalent to the KKK, equivalent to people who lynched black people, that would impede your goal of trying to get to a common understanding. Is that not reasonable? Is that not a reasonable critique that one could levy against you?
Well, the problem is, I think the opposite has actually been the case. The aversion to calling, a spade has actually been a huge detriment to American politics. We've basically been seeing like the resurgence of a modern American fascist movement being built up, like brick by brick. And this entire time we've been thinking, you know, oh, it's hyperbolic to call it this. It's over the top. You know, you're God-lawing the entire conversation. It's worthless. You're being silly. You're ostracizing people. And right now, Ron DeSantis is threatening felony charges for teachers who have degenerate material in their books, by which any mention of sexuality or gender, providing government-backed white lists for stuff they're allowed to show, and it's like, oh, that's literally just like a Nazi policy, like explicitly, straightforwardly, like you will be held to account if you spread degeneracy to the school children. Degeneracy.
Sure, which Jordan Peterson has condemned the attempts of Ron DeSantis to censor critical race theory, so that would put him squarely on the opposite end of the fascist one.
But he does, nonetheless, attack, in this case, everything that the left has to do with the gender, sexuality, trans people, and the like. I did find the quote, by the way, when he was talking about Putin and Ukraine and Putin's reasoning for invading Ukraine. He did literally describe the U.S. ideology of gender ideology, gender norms, as degenerate. He actually said the word, which I didn't remember, but
sure, he didn't say that. He didn't say Elliot Page was degenerate. He didn't call out that name, but he said that the broader movement towards cutting off the breasts of 13-year-olds is degenerate.
No,
I agree with that.
No. He said
that wasn't clear.
He said U.S. culture wars were degenerate. And then he said that it was irresponsible of Elliot Page to exist in public while showcasing that what he is calling degeneracy in this video. So this is directly like Nazi ideology. He's even using the term. We don't have to do any inference on his intentions. It's pretty straightforward.
Again, I think if you accept that there is a concerning trend of children having medical procedures performed on them.
There isn't.
And that, again, separate debate, and we'll pull up the studies and we'll see who's right rather than who sounds more confident when they assert it. Hold on, let's go back to what you were saying about you need to call a spade a spade. Okay, here is why I think what you are doing is very detrimental to the conversation in general. It's called syndrome, and I coined it. So for those people watching, you may be harken back to the Incredibles movie in which the primary villain named Syndrome. There's a scene in which he has imprisoned the Incredibles, and he says to them, he reveals his master plan. He says, when I'm old, I will sell all my inventions, and the inventions that made me super, and then I will give them to the world. And when everyone's super, no one will be. And that's syndrome. When you use a word so broadly that it means everything and nothing at the same time, you actually allow the people who identify with that word to get a free pass. It's like what the Republicans do with communism. Oh, you want to raise the minimum wage? That's communism, that's socialism. Or it's what the left does with racism. Oh, there's a disparity of any kind, that's racism. You know, I can't even think of the thousands of examples. I know you've made videos about all the weird racist shit that the left does. And, you know, they assume everything is possible is racist. It's the same point. And you using the word fascist, which, again, this is one of those examples of everyone watching this who doesn't already agree with you or know what you're saying. They hear fascist and they think Adolf Hitler. And you're saying, well, no, I mean fascist in this very unique way. And I want to call a spade. And it's like, okay, all you're doing is allowing the real fascists. Oh, hello?
Hello.
Oh, the screen went out. All you're doing is allowing the real fascists to get away basically scot-free because, oh, well, they're calling everyone a fascist now, so we can actually bring our real fascist ideology into the mix. I think Nick Fuentes is precisely as influential as he is because people have been so imprecise with calling out their opponents as being fascist. It's wrong. And
Nick Fuentes is not
the situation that we're in.
Nick Fuentes is not unique in his ideology. Even some of his cohorts were saying...
he's a real fascist.
Well, no. Even some of his cohorts were saying one of the reasons why he's so obsessed with saying racial slurs and screaming about Jews is because he has to distinguish himself from somebody who is otherwise identical to him, Charlie Kirk. See, this is the issue with what you're saying. You bring indignation, but in reality, the ideology... You say fascism is some unique thing? No! Fascism is one of...
You use it as unique.
No, I don't. I use it by its standardized definitions, or at least one of them, because all political ideologies have... Yes! See, all you offer is indignation. Liberalism is the dominant ideology of this planet, but it is followed very closely in second by fascism. If you take a look all over the world, China, India, Turkmenistan, the idea of ultranatalist, xenophobic, bigoted, ultranationalist, this isn't an uncommon
None of those
ideology.
apply to Jordan Peterson, and he explicitly calls all of those out.
He calls
Ultranationalist,
the
Jordan
terms
Peterson
So this is the problem with Jordan Peterson. It's one of the reasons why talking about his ideology is frustrating. He, terminologically, he distinguishes himself not only from fascism, but conservatism. And then you take a look at his videos in the Daily Wire, and he's screeching about how the West is going to fall because of degeneracy of sexuality and gender inflicted by liberals. And it's like, oh, this isn't at all distinct from actual neo-Nazi propaganda.
Okay, so you're a consequentialist, correct? You evaluate people by the consequences of their actions.
Sure.
Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. So if someone supports Jordan Peterson, does that not make them you just told me, you just laid out as clear as day, from your perspective, why Jordan Peterson is a fascist. Even a Nazi, because he's not just a fascist, he's repeating Nazi conspiracy.
Well, I don't think
theories.
he's a Nazi. I think he's repeating Nazi
But he called
theories.
Elliot Page a degenerate. Why doesn't that make him a Nazi?
Because I don't think that being a Nazi is just employing Nazis' theories on degeneracy. I think that you would need to fill a higher criteria than that.
Good answer. Okay, but he is a fascist, correct?
Oh yeah, he cleanly meets that criteria.
Right, cleanly. So if I, knowing this, for example, give money to Jordan Peterson by buying his products, like his self-authoring suite, am I not a fascist by supporting someone who is explicitly a fascist, knowing that he is a fascist?
No, I mean, I pay taxes
not?
to the U.S. government. That doesn't necessarily make me its supporter.
Okay, that's not your choice. But if you donated to someone who was a communist party, would that not pretty clearly make you at least a communist sympathizer?
It'd be indicative. I think that there are reasons why people like Jordan Peterson.
All right, we're getting closer.
There are reasons why people like Jordan Peterson that aren't his fascism. However, these days especially, and it would be less so the case like 5 years ago, but these days especially, he is primarily associated with conservatism first and foremost. It's his videos, his tweets, the material he produces is that of pushing fascist conservative politics. And to that end, I think it's getting more and more difficult to appreciate him for reasons other than that. It's possible, though. I don't mean to completely denounce it. There are a lot of people I see sometimes in his YouTube videos who come across as politically unmotivated, but largely okay people. You can never really tell from a YouTube comment, but it's totally possible.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, well.